Welcome to Sight and Scene, the podcast where technology meets terrain and insights transform our understanding of the world. Hosted by industry experts with decades of experience, Sight and Scene dives into the cutting-edge tools and techniques reshaping how we visualize, map, and interact with the spaces around us.
In each episode, we explore the latest advancements in drones, GIS, CAD, geomatics, and scanning, showcasing applications not just in the built environment, but across a spectrum of industries, from environmental monitoring to urban development and beyond. We bring you stories from the field and interviews with fascinating people on the cutting edge of geospatial technology.
Sight and Scene.
People call in and reports that, there's drone's up to no good because I'm seeing something flying around at night and it's got lights on. Well, the very fact that it's got lights on means it's probably up to some good, because that is regulation. You're following the rules. It's like a car with headlights on at night.
Right. Scott, we are back for a special episode. We got some exciting stuff, and we decided to shift around our release dates of our episodes slightly to address this hot topic. What are we talking about tonight?
We're talking about drones flying at night and the many, many reports that the FAA and others are getting of drone spottings, especially in my backyard, apparently.
Drones everywhere. We're titling this one Midnight Rotor, where we are going to talk about all of the happenings that the news is reporting on in the media, and what's hype, what's reality, what makes good, responsible drone pilots, what are the regulations, just wanting to have a general discussion, but also an informative discussion so that people understand the regulations around drones, night flights. The vast, vast majority of people that do have drones in this country are responsible in using them according to all of these regulations. So just think it'll be good for folks to understand the bigger picture before jumping to conclusions and creating opinions that might not be so favorable for drones.
Yeah, absolutely. And like a lot of things on the podcast, I think the takeaway I hoped that we can give is, how does this affect a commercial operator? How does this actually affect what you're doing if you need to get work done with with a drone?
Yeah, you got a good story to share about that. So, okay, so fun facts. We each have one, and Scott, you want to kick it off?
Sure. So relevant to this episode, I'll start with a fun fact of, it took me a long time to figure out what the actual definition of civil twilight was. If you are working on your Part 107, or you're, an aspiring drone pilot, or you're working professionally with drones, you may have heard of that drones need special things when they fly at night, and night is between civil twilight. So the definition of civil twilight, my fun fact, it's either 30 minutes before sunrise, the period from 30 minutes before sunrise, and also the period 30 minutes after sunrise, except Alaska. This is where it gets interesting. Alaska's always got some fun asterisks next to it when it comes to aviation, just because of how north it is. And so that's going to be in the Air Almanac, which we will not discuss in this podcast. I'll be here all day. But basically, Alaska has special considerations for what civil twilight is. Long story short, it's still pretty close to 30 minutes before sunrise, 30 minutes after, just a bit different. But that is it. So everything we talk about at night, if we talk about that this episode, I want you to think 30 minutes before sunrise or 30 minutes after sunset.
Yeah, nice. I got my aviation almanac next to my farmer's almanac.
There you go.
Yeah.
The almanac shelf.
Okay, and I'm going to have a rundown of drones by the numbers in the United States. And this is information that's published on the FAA's website. You can go to faa.gov/node, NODE /54496 if you're curious. But drones by the numbers as of December 2nd, 2024. Total registered drones, 1 million plus. Of those, the commercial drones are 403,358, which that was a big surprise to me. We were chatting about that, how the commercial drone registrations outweigh the recreational flight.
Yeah.
So that registrations. which is pretty fascinating to me. Recreational registrations is 387,355. And if I scroll down a little bit here, certified remote pilots, and we'll talk about that here in a second, what that means. And then trust certificates issued. And trust certificates are for recreational pilots, and it gives them some, the rundown of the regulations of the do's and don'ts when they're out flying recreationally to keep themselves, the public, and aircraft safe. So what is the remote pilot all about, Scott?
Yeah. So like in the trust certificate?
Yeah, it said certified remote pilots.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So that's everyone who has a 107 then. Yeah. Which is, they put in a weird way. They could have just put 107 certificates issued, but
yeah,
they like to change the wording up a little bit. Yeah. So that just tells you how many people have a 107 certificate there, which is pretty crazy. So what's that number again?
It's 423,047.
Okay. Yep. And a big takeaway I got from this is, right, this is what the FAA reports. The number's bigger, right? There are drones that are not registered. First of all, there's drones that are exempt from registration, a couple of those, but there's also someone gets a drone for Christmas. They are not going to necessarily register it immediately. There are drones that sit on the shelf. There are a lot of other reasons where there's drones that exist out there that might not show up on this list. So this list undershoots the amount of drones out there rather than overshoots, I find.
Yeah. Yeah, and obviously there's a vast difference in capabilities of drones too. You might get a drone from a toy store that might be able to fly 100 feet away from you before it loses its signal. And that's really not what this is intending to address. These are drones that are much more capable. Okay, so with all this news, Scott, with all the hype, what's your take on it?
So I have many takes on this here. I think a good way to sum up the takes, a bit of a shameless plug, but I was interviewed in the New York Times, and we can give a link to that article. Was really interesting because I think that article sums up a lot of how I feel about this right now. There's a lot of noise going on. There's a lot of people looking in the sky, not for the first time, but looking up at the sky just because it's on the news, and looking around and just seeing how much air traffic we really have, especially in the tri-state area here in New York.
Oh, yeah.
And the article and a lot of my own looking into this really turns up that can be difficult to distinguish a drone from an airplane if you don't fly drones every single day or even that often, or fly aircraft.
Even if you do, it's still difficult to understand what you're seeing.
Exactly. Actually, in that interview, they showed me a bunch of videos. They were like, okay, we want you to watch 10 videos and just give us your take. We're not going to tell you anything. Just say it. And
that's cool.
It was fun. It was like playing Guess Who with airplanes or drones. And, a lot of them are very obviously airplanes, to be honest. And so I watched a lot of that, and I was like, hey, this is clearly a Delta United Airlines flight just headed into Newark. Nothing to see there. But when you get to aircraft that are far away, when you look at that, half of these sightings are from grainy footage on people's smartphones. It starts to become harder and harder, especially when you weren't there, you weren't the one witnessing it. And you're just kind of looking at secondhand footage, which is like 90% of these determinations. So that all goes to say that I think people are realizing we have extremely busy airspace. Determining the difference between a drone and an aircraft can be quite difficult. And, applying a little bit of Occam's razor, the simplest solution might be the best. I think it's just a huge variety of air traffic that we're seeing. Nothing nefarious, nothing going on, but it doesn't even have to be airline flights. You have a lot of small aircraft that fly all around New Jersey, flight training, sightseeing, even at night. That's a lot of stuff going on. And so that's been my first takeaway, that there's just so much air traffic. It's made me appreciate how much is going on in terms of just a number of aircraft flying in our sky at any given part of night. And it's trying to make me be a little bit of more responsible operator still, of like being considerate that people don't necessarily know what's going on. They don't know everything about, my day-to-day job. And I take for granted a bit how much people look up at the sky and don't know what they're looking at.
Yeah. Yeah. Maybe a byproduct of this is people are looking up in the sky more and rediscovering the stars too. Like
Yeah, exactly. I hope so.
this lost love of the sky. But there are so many things happening in the sky day and night, and even satellite
Yeah,
activity.
yeah. Starlink.
If your sky is clear enough and you have good views, you could see a lot of the satellites orbiting around the Earth, and you can see a lot of the Starlink satellites. There's just this string of pearls just drifting across the sky, and you're like, wow, that's crazy. So there is a lot of activity out there, and to the untrained or even partially trained eye, it's really hard to discern. And then you take the hype built up around it, and you know froth up public perception around what's going on. Then I think we have what we're getting in the news cycles right now. You know, I think an unfortunate part of this possibly is just how it's influencing public perception around drones, particularly given the use of some of these tools as weapons of war. And you hear about them, you know, with some of the conflicts happening around the world. And there are tons of regulations here in the United States to make sure that our airspace remains safe. And I know that we want to talk through those just to give people an understanding of what is involved with owning and operating a drone safely, and especially as a commercial drone pilot, because the vast majority of drone pilots are operating in accordance with the regulations and in a safe manner. Does that mean that there aren't some people out there doing things that either just out of ignorance they don't realize they shouldn't be doing, or they're doing it to cause trouble and nothing with like malicious intent, but just to be a prankster type thing? I'm sure it's all of the above, but I just want to emphasize the vast majority of us, especially those of us who our livelihood depends on drones and using them safely and within the guidelines of the FAA, that we don't, one, be a cause of this perception, or do something that could get us into hot water from a regulatory sense. And I think some of the perception, and I've experienced this too, I'm going to frame it in a couple different ways. The first way is there's those that, you know, people that just outdoorsy, they love nature, they love being out in remote areas, getting away from it all, the peace and quiet. I'm one of those people. And let's say you're out there thinking you're all by your lonesome in a wilderness setting and just enjoying the serenity, and someone's flying a drone over your head. I get it. You know, that could be really, that could be a bummer, right? And I'm conflicted at times because I am a drone pilot and it is my business, but I'm also very respectful of those situations and circumstances and just try to be as mindful as I can. But there are times when wilderness areas, for example, there are flight restrictions for wilderness areas. You're not allowed to fly in some of these areas. So. Yeah. So, but there are areas where you are allowed to fly. The vast majority of the sky, you can fly a drone in, and there are regulations that stipulate how that's done. So sometimes people get really upset if there's a drone overhead and they think that you're violating some sort of rule. And then they want to talk to you about it while you're flying your drone. And, you know, there's all kinds of circumstances that as drone pilots, we could all share our stories. Maybe that'd be a fun episode. Share your stories. But, you know, when we're performing a job and we're on the clock and you have people coming up to you with maybe they're a little bit charged up and wanting to have a conversation, you know, there's definitely some tactics to handle that, and or having things in place so that you have a visual observer who's with you, who can help handle that public facing side of things to make sure that you stay extremely focused on the task at hand.
Yep. I think it's a big important part as drone pilots to understand that the public does exist. They're out there, and it's that balance. It's that balance of you're doing a job, someone comes up and I usually find people are very nice in public, but they are very curious too. They have a lot of questions about what the drone does, which is great. I love answering them, but like any of us, if it's kind of like if we're busy at work on our job, it's difficult to get the job done and answer the questions at the same time. So that's when you're talking about a visual observer, that's exactly what I do. I will hire a visual observer or bring one of our visual observers, not just for the drone and safety of the drone, but to actually be kind of the public interface, that the pilot can stay on the controls and the pilot can kind of stay focused on the job. And then you have a second person who can talk to the public and give a curious person their attention to say, yeah, we're doing a drone for a facade inspection here for ABC. And once the person understands what's going on and that, it's not just some random person like snooping around with an aerial camera, this is a construction worker basically, then they tends to be a much, much more positive engagement from then on out. And then they also tend to let us get the job done and give us some chance to at least finish the flight before we chat up with them.
For sure. Yeah. I think the high-vis clothing is a must as a commercial operator. Having branded high-vis, I mean, if you can get it branded, but at a minimum, you have some clothing on that indicates that you're out there doing this professionally and you're not just some yahoo out there flying a drone next to a building trying to peek into windows or whatever the perception is around that. I would say the vast majority of the experiences I've had are more come from that place of curiosity as opposed to somebody just worked up about the fact that a drone's over their head. It was actually kind of funny when I first started flying a drone. I would try to do my best effort to go talk to the people in the immediate area. Be like, hey, just so you know, I'm going to be flying a drone over here for this ABC, and I felt like that wasn't the best approach overall. There's a limit to how much you share with people versus have them maybe engage with you in that visual observer.
That's such a great point, and there's such an interesting balance that is really unique to drone flying, because if you think like a surveyor construction worker, right? They don't go around and say, hey, I have this site stakeout I'm about to do, so I've got this gadget looking thing on a tripod, and I'm going to open it up and I'm just letting you know that I'm going to do that. They kind of have this comfort of people know, even if they don't know exactly what a total station is, they know what a surveyor is, and they're just totally in that comfort zone. But drones don't quite work that way.
Yeah.
So you feel obligated to go out and tell everyone, but then that ends up causing, I've had the same exact experience. It ends up causing almost like more harm than good, because I don't know. It's just, it almost feels like you're going up to somebody and saying, hey, I'm going to start my car and drive it around this area. They almost like, what are you doing?
Why are you telling me this?
It's totally innocent, and it comes from a good place, but there is something about like stirring up the pot, so to speak, in the local area. I will add one more tidbit, though, that here in New York City, we are required, this is part of the NYPD's permit, and originally I wasn't a fan of this, but I actually kind of like it. We're actually required to post notices. We have to put up like staple to the telephone poles, just like a film permit works actually. Hey, January 10th, 2025 from 9 a.m. to 11 a.m. there will be a drone, and it will be doing a facade inspection on this building.
I like that.
I have to go check. I don't think you're required to post any contact info for it, because the approval is already done and you can contact the NYPD if you had concerns. But yeah, I actually am a huge fan of that. And to me, it is pretty close to a film permit. That's a big process here in New York City. People always want to know what are they doing in this corner? What are they filming? And there's actually these notices that they post. They don't have to tell you everything, but they do have to say, we're going to start here. We're going to be done by this date. And, this is the general purpose.
Yeah, I like that. I think New York is definitely way more progressive in a lot of these mechanisms for informing and trying to keep people safe.
Definitely.
So that's great. This leads a little bit into informing the public, or the public's right to know certain things. That gets me thinking about remote ID and what the intention of that is. And maybe just for our listeners, we could dive deeper into that so that they are aware of all of the things that remote ID does for the industry.
Sure. Yeah. And so remote ID is still a pretty relatively new new tool that the FAA has and a new requirement here. It was about this time last year that I believe they finalized it and made it an absolute requirement. So the long story short is remote ID allows you, it basically is that your drone is constantly broadcasting its position. It's broadcasting a couple of items about the flight that's going on. And also it is broadcasting the location of the pilot and the controller, which initially was something that drone pilots were concerned about. And I think we've settled on a pretty happy medium here, because exactly like I said, there's a balance between do I want every single person to know I have, a very expensive drone here and I'm in the middle of nowhere and broadcasting my location, but the public has a right to know what is going on. Right?
It's that accountability piece.
Exactly. And so remote ID was kind of developed as a compromise for all this. And the way it works is it's a short range kind of thing. I don't know the exact distance that it transmits, but it's not like Flight Aware where you can go to a website and see every drone in the sky. That's not quite how it works. What it is it's a tool where the law enforcement or anybody who has a tool that can read remote ID, let's say someone calls up 911 and says, hey, there's a drone flying over here. Well, presumably the idea is that law enforcement could come and they have a receiver that they can bring that are like portable enough to fit in the police car, let's say, and that they can actually read where the drone is, where the controller is, and the registration number of the drone. So they can look it up and they can say, okay, that's Scott Harrigan. He's doing a facade inspection. And, oh, look, he's at the corner of this street. So they can pull up and then come up to us and say, hey, look, we got a call. Someone was worried about a drone. What's going on? In a ideal scenario, that's how remote ID works. And we are all for that. I want people to know where we are. And it does kind of strike that balance, I think, of we're broadcasting our intentions basically, but not to every single person. It's meant to be read by law enforcement who are more in the know and can, be that liaison between the public and what we're doing if somebody calls and they're have any concerns.
Yeah, I think too, if there is an issue, say there's a drone crashes into a side of a building and falls down and causes some minor damage to a building or something like that, or if there something in that flight was not being done according to regulations, that the drone is actually collecting, much like a plane, and the plane's little black box, it has a flight recorder that records what the drone is doing, what altitude it was at. So to me, that's another one of these accountability tools that if you're doing something that you shouldn't be doing, and as a result, you crash a drone or cause property damage or, God forbid, someone gets hurt, then there are these tools there that people can do a further investigation into what actually happened.
Exactly.
So the point in bringing all this up is that drones are very sophisticated pieces of hardware that need regulation to help, one, keep everybody in the busy airspace safe, but it is these accountability tools that help us commercial and responsible pilots use these tools for good and use them for all of the things that they're doing across multiple industries. So I would be curious if we put out a questionnaire to people, what are all the commercial uses for drones in this country, and how, or if there's some sort of dollar value associated with the impact of drones on industry in this country. And I think people would be really surprised at how much these tools are helping across multiple industries, not to mention the public safety and law enforcement and search and rescue. Drones are literally saving people's lives that have gone missing. They're in a remote area. Somebody's hurt. Somebody deploys a thermal drone and captures the heat signature of somebody. They have speakers on them, spotlights. They can capture the coordinates of that person, send it off to people to search and rescue to come in a much more expedited manner. So they're extremely important tools in everyday society as far as what they're doing at the commercial level. And at the recreational level, obviously it's a different perspective on things, and people and hobbyists, they really enjoy flying drones. And I would say photographers, if you're a photographer who's not necessarily selling your photos, but you just like taking photos, drones can give you a vantage point like no other camera, obviously. Yeah. So they're artistic tools. Yes. They are entertainment for hobbyists that just like to fly. I mean, there's been hobbyist RC aircraft pilots for decades, and the drone is just a different flight. Yeah, it's a different tool.
Exactly. If it's one thing I think is a good takeaway, and connecting it back to the beginning of this podcast when we're talking about people's negative perceptions here and there. Something I've noticed online in banter about drones in the general public is I think people automatically they don't know all the good things drones are used for. So when they're like, why is a drone here, they might jump to a negative connotation.
Yep.
I've seen a lot of people online just be like, well, there shouldn't be any drones like anywhere near me because all a drone is good for is all a drone does to them is either spy or cause havoc or something.
Yeah.
But what's the amazing part is I bet if somebody went into their community, their own community, and really asked around, like asked every single person, you'd be amazed how many of your neighbors and your neighbors' neighbors and the people around actually own a drone, either for fun, and they get a lot of enjoyment out of it for fun, or they're a police officer and they use it in their day job for that, or they're a photographer and they use it in their day job. I tell people it is like a flying computer, and think of how people use computers all sorts of ways. And I think we could all agree that like computers can be used for bad stuff. But if you went to someone on the street and asked them how they're using a computer today, for like the 99% of it, it's a good reason, or at least a productive reason in society.
Sure. Yeah.
And drones work the exact same way.
We wanted to share what are some of the regulations around flying drones, especially at night. Again, just building awareness and confidence in how these tools should be used. Again, there's, people do stupid shit. I'll just say sometimes people do stupid shit and it's not for malicious intent. There are so much technology built into these things to keep them safely in the sky and even safely away from other aircraft, whether it's broadcasting its own signal out so that other aircraft are receiving. I think it's more of the receiving side of things where your drone is receiving information from other aircraft that are broadcasting, and it alerts the pilot of a proximity of another aircraft. So just there's lots of things that we're going to run through real quick to one around regulations of flying drones, just generally speaking, to the nighttime aspect of that. And then the third bit of that, we can talk a little bit about some of the features on these drones that again just enhance that safety aspect of flying a drone.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I can jump in and kind of explain what the night regulations actually are, because I think people might be surprised. So first off, like, can you fly at night? Can you fly a drone at night? Can anybody recreationally or commercially? And the answer is yes, you absolutely can. And this changed in 2021. Originally, you had to go and get something called a waiver from the FAA, which was like special permission. But the FAA had kind of looked at the benefits of flying at night and realized there's a lot of them for both recreational reasons and commercial reasons. And so now you can. And the number one thing you need to fly at night is proper lighting. So you need to attach a anti-collision light to the drone that can be seen from at least 3 statute miles away. It's usually the flashing bright white strobe that you'll see on a lot of drones there. And so I do kind of joke that, number one, when people call in and reports that, oh, there's a drone's up to no good because I'm seeing something flying around at night and it's got lights on. Well, the very fact that it's got lights on means it's probably up to some good, because that is the regulation. You're following the rules. It's like a car with headlights on at night.
Right.
So yeah, if you see lights on a drone, that's a good thing. And that's the number one you need. You also need some specific training on night operations, so the pilots are actually aware of the limitations of flying at night, mostly just based on how hard it is to your decreased situational awareness because everything around you is dark.
Yep.
And that's covered under 107. That's covered under the standard license that drone pilots get commercially. But that's the main one.
Well, what about recreational pilots and flying at night?
Yeah. So I believe it's the same thing. I'm going to have to go and double check my recreational rules, dust that off. But
yeah,
I believe you do need the light stop right at night, because the idea is to avoid a collision with manned aircraft, or so that you or the visual observer can see where the drone is versus terrain, buildings, that kind of thing.
Yeah, and usually that strobe for recreational drones is not something that's built into the drone. It's a third-party accessory that you would have to add to the drone. So then, people are always looking for something that broadcasts or emits light at that 3 statute miles. But then you're also attaching something to the airframe of a drone. And if it's not done properly, that's something to consider when you're looking at a desire to fly at night. But a lot of the enterprise and commercial level drones do have built-in strobes that meet those standards.
Exactly. Yeah.
And I liked what you said, Scott, about the lights being on. If somebody was really up to no good, are they going to be out there flashing and broadcasting themselves to? It's just like that aspect of the whole drones in the New Jersey sky was like, okay, really? Somebody's out there up to no good. They're just, look at me.
Exactly. I can promise you the drone that's up to no good is not going to have its lights on. So I hope that'll be a comfort to people, if anything, if you do see a drone flying around.
Yeah. I wanted to also touch on some of the other regulations about flying drones that people may not be aware of. Is that the airspace, there's definitely restricted airspace in all types of scenarios, whether you're in close proximity to an airport, whether you're around a military installation or some sensitive area that they don't want anyone operating drones nearby, or there could be wildlife areas, that sensitive wildlife areas or wilderness areas. There's temporary flight restrictions that might be in place for, say there's a dignitary or a government official, like the president is flying to your city. They're going to issue a notice to airmen that basically creates a flight restriction for that entire area. I know that, I can't remember, it was like 3 years ago, Biden flew into Portland, and the entire airspace for this massive area around Portland was just shut down for 24 hours that you couldn't fly. Exactly. So part of being a responsible pilot is knowing where to look to understand what's happening in the airspace, where you can and can't fly, if you can fly. And there's also geofencing that is installed on a lot of these drone manufacturers' equipment. And the geofencing will not allow the drone to fly past this barrier in the sky. So you could see these posted on maps, and usually with DJI, they'll have these geofenced areas around sensitive locations, areas that you're not supposed to be flying. So if you tried to fly your drone into this area that's restricted, it won't let you. It'll just say, boom, it'll stop the drone and it will not let you fly in these areas. So as commercial pilots, we have the ability to request ways of getting authorization to fly within these areas. And then you have to submit, if you're in an area that is restricted by air traffic control, they typically show, there's a lot to, this is kind of getting into part 107 stuff, but there's sectional charts that is governed by the FAA, and they tell you, what type of airport it is, how these different radiuses out from the airport, and how high you're able to fly with authorization or without. And a lot of times, if you're flying in some of these areas, you can get what's called a LANC certification with a low altitude. Help me out here, Scott. Low
altitude, I think, area notification.
Yeah.
I'm gonna Google it as well. stuff I should know, but
we know how to get it, and we know what
Yeah.
what the intention is. But
it's low altitude authorization and notification capability.
There you go. So this allows you to submit an application to get authorization. And if you're flying below the stated ceiling of a particular area, that's often just an automatic acceptance of that, which then you have to submit to the drone manufacturer to remove the geofencing.
Yeah.
So the reason this is important is a lot of these drones that are being reported in the sky, and I've heard that over military bases and things like that. A military base definitely has geofencing around it, and a lot of these drones are likely not even able to fly into those because the hardware and the software on that drone is going to stop it from going there. So whether people are just seeing this and their depth perception at night is so vastly different than what they think they might be seeing, that it's not the case at all.
Exactly. And for that same reason too, the way the regulations work and all of that is if there is a drone flying over a military base, well, obviously the military has like the total authority to disable, get it out of the sky, right? The public can't shoot a drone out of the sky. It's a federal offense to have the public do that, but the military is a different story, right? So, there's that balance built into the regulations where we can do a lot as we should as commercial operators. But if someone is acting nefarious and in a place where they shouldn't be, well, yeah, government has the authority to take action on that.
Yeah. Yeah. One other thing I wanted to mention too, if I don't think I've mentioned this, is the altitude. So as a pilot with a drone, you are not allowed to fly over 400 feet above ground level. So if you're in a perfectly flat field and as far as the eye can see, it's all the same elevation, you're capped out at 400 feet.
Yeah.
And where that could change a little bit is if you're in mountainous terrain, you can maintain that 400 feet as long as you're maintaining it off of that elevation that's gaining. Like say you're flying up a mountainside, as long as you are no higher than 400 feet from the spot directly below you, you can do that under the current regulations. It also applies to buildings. Like if you're around buildings or structures, you can fly 400 feet above the height of a particular building. So say you're doing a facade scan of 1,000-foot building, you can technically fly 1,400 feet above that building within a certain radius of that building, which I believe is 500 feet, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes. Yep.
And then there's also clouds. So I think there's a lot to it that, again, the intent is just to let people know that there's a lot in place.
Yes.
For people to know and understand to maintain safe flight operations.
Yep. Exactly. There's just a lot more required of us than most people would expect. And again, then there's mechanisms for stopping the bad actors. I'll add too with the TFR stuff. If you have a off the shelf like drone from DJI or one of the popular manufacturers, often they don't even start. If you're inside that TFR, that no fly zone, and you try to start the drone, it will just refuse to take off. Yep. So, these are all tools that are there to stop people from like doing bad stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. What are some of the hardware, software that also is intended to keep the drone safe?
Yeah, we have a lot of things going on too. In addition to geofencing, we have like ADS-B, right? We have that kind of stuff in and out there. So the way ADS-B works, for example, is a lot of modern drones, like I know all of DJI's drones have it. They actually have the ability to read ADS-B, which is a transponder that manned aircraft will have, and it will actually notify you if an aircraft is coming in to the area. I just had this. I was a project where I was doing a authorized flight in an airport's airspace down in Virginia, and system beeps and it actually points on your screen like a little arrow direction where air traffic is coming. And sure enough, there was a pretty low flying helicopter. Was I allowed to be there? Yep. Was the helicopter allowed to be there? Also, yes. But the system kicks in to make me, as the drone pilot, the helicopter has right of way. So it's actually dependent on me, the drone pilot, to give way to the helicopter. So that system actually beeps and notifies you and tells you where it is so you can take corrective action if you need to, which is usually just landing or flying lower as a drone pilot.
Yeah. And that is secondary to situational awareness. Like that,
Yeah.
I mean, being
Yeah.
being a responsible pilot means that you assess the where you're flying very carefully, very closely, and that you are constantly aware of what's happening, regardless if you're flying an automated mission as opposed to flying manually. That is just, it's absolutely critical.
Exactly.
Yeah. I wanted to plug a little bit of DJI because I think DJI gets, I think it's no secret that they are by far the most capable, well-known drone company in the world. I mean, they really pioneered the space, and
Yeah.
they have incredible tools and technology. And most of the drones that I have in my fleet are DJI drones. And a big part of that is because they are the most reliable, they're the most safe, they are the most capable. And when we're talking about, again, perceptions and people concerned about drones falling out of the sky or whatever, you know, it's worth mentioning that having good technology and development and safety tools and reliability behind these tools that are flying in the sky is something that is valuable and a strong consideration as a business owner when you're selecting the tools for your operations.
Definitely. I'll add too of one of the reasons is there's a lot of liability on a drone pilot. Carry insurance too. Insurance is required for a lot of drone permits as well. Like again, going back to New York City here, we have to carry $2 million of commercial insurance to even get approved there. So if something does happen, it's on me.
Yeah.
By quite a bit financially. But that's just all the more reason why we want to use tools that are super reliable, because I want anyone I'm flying around to feel safe and to feel like, this operation is totally by the book.
Yeah. Okay, so we wanted to run down almost like a pre-flight checklist of what does a good, safe flight operation look like, is from the pre-planning phase to flying the drone. How we both do it, I bet, very similarly, Scott, because it's just good practice. But how do you, like, what does it look like for you?
Yeah. And I'll even specifically get into like what that looks like for night operations too, because there's a little more that we have to do. But first off, we talked about airspace, right? First thing we're doing on these projects is like we're checking the airspace and we're looking to see, can we even legally fly here? Like we talked about military bases, airports, that kind of stuff. But also, do we need to get approval? And what times do we need? What's the time frame for that? Weather is always an important one too, right? There are requirements. Because we're flying visual line of sight, we have to have good visibility. That's totally a requirement. And obviously we're not going to be flying in like rain or precipitation. Drones that we're operating are not waterproof. So this, you want to be flying in clear weather. But the other two that are interesting here, especially with night operations, because your situational awareness is much more limited at night. And that's a pretty big deal. So the big thing we're looking for at night is we're always going out ahead of time, if not the day before, several days before, to actually do a scout of the flight. Because you're things like high transmission, electrical lines, and maybe just and cell towers, and all of these things that are in the area that you won't necessarily even see well on Google Maps if you do a quick look of the area. And just all these things that you want to be aware of, so that when you go there at night with that more limited situational awareness, okay, there are power lines here. I don't want to fly near those, or,
Right.
There's an area, just some sensitive area. And again, just back to being a responsible operator, that scouting is kind of like, okay, well, what's a safe takeoff and landing zone? What are areas where I fly the drone that, sometimes it's not always a safety thing. Sometimes it's, where can I fly the drone that won't disturb people? I'm going to go and fly in a parking lot at the corner of a intersection, not right in front of somebody's house, right at their doorstep on the sidewalk. I might be able to legally fly from either, right?
Yeah.
Maybe I can be Part 107 compliant and take off from the sidewalk. But it's much better to pick a more discreet location. Again, not to hide the drone operation from anybody, but just to be a good operator and be responsible, and not make it so in people's faces.
Yeah.
Again, it's It's a tool, and we want to get that job done. And I joke, we kind of want to be as in and out as the public wants us to be too. I would like to just, get the drone up, do the inspection I got to do, done, land. And
the less opportunities you create for somebody to come and, interrupt what you're doing or draw your attention, I think you're just better off for it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I like to think about that scouting piece is critical. And part of that too is just understanding your minimum minimum obstacle clearance altitude.
Yes.
Or what some of us drone pilots call MOCA. What is your MOCA? So they're going out. What's really cool about the drone is that you can put your camera perfectly level and turn on the crosshairs of your drone so that you can see exactly the altitude of certain things. You could fly up to a treetop, fly up and put the crosshairs right on, and it tells you exactly how high you are. So having that logged mentally and even in your logbook for that flight preparation, it's really critical to understand what those obstacles are and the clearances that you need. Also wildlife, a lot of times out here in the Pacific Northwest, it's just abundant life out here. And, the last thing that I want to do is disturb a nest of, some avian animal that is nesting, or and here in Oregon too. And I imagine a lot of places there are restricted areas when certain birds are nesting at certain times of the year. So obviously those are other things that we need to consider and be respectful of. But there's a lot of times I'll be flying close to water, and there's a lot of osprey and bald eagles out here that just love being around the water. So more often than not, I've just seen them be really curious when they see a drone, but my eye is on that raptor the entire flight. I'm just watching and being ready to take it out of autonomous mode, or, however I'm flying, I'm just ready to make a move if I need to. So that, wildlife can definitely play a factor in that planning, is just understanding what you have around that particular site.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I think beyond that is some of the pre-flight checklist is looking over your drone. So you look over the airframe of the drone, you're inspecting all the sensors, you're looking at all of the rotors and the blades, making sure there aren't any nicks in the blades and everything is attached securely. I have a whole checklist that I have with me on my iPad that I go through before each flight. And that way, if something happens, you're demonstrating, thankfully I haven't had any issues while out flying, but when accidents happen or there's a hardware issue or something like that, it's good to have good notes and good logs so that you can help paint the whole story of what happened and how it maybe could have been prevented. So I think it's just a good practice for any pilot to be diligent about your logging of flights and just writing down what the conditions were like. It's a good practice to have.
Definitely. I would add that too, of especially as your business grows, and if it's not just you, you have multiple pilots working with you. We've started to move to try to log night hours separately, actually, to just try to figure that out, because you can have a pilot that has hundreds of hours of drone flight time, but 2 of those hours, maybe even less, were at night. And that's not a bad thing. It's just that's honestly probably closer to what mine looks like if you were to really take it apart. Again, 90% of my operations are probably during the day. But it's a great point of, if I am looking at doing a lot of work at night for one reason or another, well, I may want to build more night proficiency. I want to just have more hours logged in that are totally in night. So I'm just more used to the unique factors that happen at night.
Yeah. Practice. I think
exactly
before putting yourself in a situation where you're flying, say the first time at night, you're flying a drone in a sensitive or complicated area, you probably want to be in some remote parking lot somewhere practicing at night before you do that. So there's no substitute for having a little bit of confidence behind you when you go into these new scenarios as a drone pilot. That's also a good segue too. What are some of the reasons we fly at night as drone pilots? as opposed to during the day. Because I think
Yeah,
people are wondering, like, why would you even fly a drone at night?
it's maybe the best question to answer in the podcast, because that's what we've been, when people have called and they're like, well, I saw a drone at night, or I think I did. Why would someone be there? There's a lot of legitimate reasons. Let's start with the commercial ones. First off, thermal imaging is the first one that always comes to my mind. When someone's like, I saw a drone at night and it seemed like it was like hovering around a building or doing some kind of mapping. Well, the way thermal cameras work, and long story short, we'll get into this in the future on a episode dedicated to thermal cameras, I'm sure. The way thermal cameras work is they're much better at detecting those differences when the sun isn't beating down on a rooftop, for example. If you're trying to measure the difference between a cold portion of a roof and a warm portion of the roof that may have moisture issues, you want to look at that through night. You actually want to look at that when the sun isn't out and the roof is cooling off. So that actually has to be done at night. The job cannot be done during the day, just based on the nature of how thermal cameras work. So that's one really big reason there. And you might have other things going on. I know, for example, a lot of like DOT projects, like Department of Transportation, where they do LiDAR scans of like roadways. Well, they want to do it when there's no traffic going on. They want to minimize the amount of cars that are around, because if they're flying over certain roadways, well, 107 compliant, you can't fly over moving vehicles, but also you don't want vehicular traffic to show up as noise in a scan. So there are certain LiDAR flights that are done at night for safety reasons, but also for mapping performance reasons, basically. So those are just two of the commercial ones. And if we count search and rescue and police operations, and we count all of that, well, yeah, things happen at night, right? Fires happen at night. Firefighters need to operate drones. Police are, answer 24/7, a call could come in. So those are public safety operations, are maybe the number one, like, most common night operation, I'd say.
Yeah.
But thermal and LiDAR definitely count.
Yeah. Yeah. And as a recreational pilot, it's just a different view of the world, right? Yep. Like if your comfort level has always been, well, I just want to fly during the day. And obviously the pictures you can get at night versus the day are just work, unique in their own way. And it's kind of artist choice there. So a hyperlapse, I know we talked about hyperlapse in another episode, but that's a moving time lapse, a dynamic moving time lapse. And those are extremely cool at night, where you can have the lights from the highways and the roads blurring in the background as this, scene unveils itself. So it's, there's a lot of artistic endeavors too at night. So, well, Scott, we've covered a lot today about drones at night, and talking about some of the public perceptions, what's happening in the news, what are some of the tools of the trade that make things safe, what are the differences between commercial pilots and recreational pilots, and the things that we do to be safe while we're out there, not only protecting property but also people. Obviously, and the vast majority of us are strong advocates for the industry and our livelihood, and we are following the rules and want to educate people on what's going on in this industry, because it's an exciting industry and there's lots of benefits that people are getting and businesses are getting out of this technology. Yeah. So if you are out stargazing one night and you see something in the air and you're curious about what it is, or you think it might be a drone, or you just want to dive deeper, there are some resources out there that you can look into to either report or get some additional information. Where can some people go, Scott, to dig into that further?
Definitely. Yeah. So there's a couple things you can do. And the first pass I always like to say is, like, look at it with a critical eye. A little bit of self-research actually goes a long way. And by that, I mean, very interesting wise, there's a site called Flight Radar 24 that shows you aircraft in the sky. And if you're wondering, is that a drone or is that an airplane or what am I looking at? Well, if it is an airplane, it's not a guarantee, but it could be likely that it shows up on Flight Radar 24. That's one of many sites where you can actually see manned aircraft flights, commercial airline flights, scheduled flights, and it's actually really cool. I've been amazed at the amount of times I've seen something fly overhead being like, what is that? And I can go on Flight Radar 24 and look it up. And it tells you, the make, the model, if it's like a, airline flight, who's operating it. Again, not a guarantee. It can also be very delayed, as in it can show up much later than you think. It's not a live, perfect view, but that's just like the first pass of maybe starting to look and figure it out.
Yeah, I flew to Chicago over Thanksgiving, and I spent half of the flight looking at the dashboard on the back of my seat of altitude, and just that you could see the flight hub, view that the pilots have.
It's addicting too.
Yeah,
it's like once you're on there, you actually so be warned. You spend hours on that site. The other one is if you do genuinely suspect that something is going on with the drone, or you have some more concerns, you can call local law enforcement. You can call your local police department. A lot of times they're a good place to answer questions. So many police departments also now have a drone department within them, like their force uses drones, and they are becoming more and more a great resource to kind of do that first pass explanation of what might be going on. For example, like here in New York City, again, we have to have a permit. So we're going to be on the record with a flight. And so if somebody calls NYPD, for example, they're going to be able to say, yep, that drone is here, and look at that. Mm-hmm. And if they don't know where it is, they're at least a first good place to start an investigation, or just do that next layer of like putting the puzzle pieces together and figure out what might be going on. What you can also do as well is there's actually is a page with the FAA to like report a UAS sighting, which they have now. I mean, if you Google FAA report UAS drone sighting, they have a page there. That's a nice way to do it too, because it's a way that, one, the FAA is always trying to collect more information. It actually helps them and informs them what's going on, because they're comparing drone sightings with manned aircraft flights, and they're just trying to figure out better ways to manage our airspace, but also how to convey to the public when a drone flight might be going on versus a manned aircraft flight. So reporting that definitely goes on the record. It helps a lot, and there's a forum on there. If you just, again, you can just Google FAA report drone sighting, it'll take you right to the page to do that. And yeah, you can also reach out to what's called a FAA Flight Standards District Office. Again, if you Google FAA Flight Standards District Office, you can find the FAA resource that has phone numbers. And a lot of people don't realize this. The FAA, there's like local offices. They're usually at most major airports. And my experience with them has been nothing but phenomenal. I've reached out to them saying, hey, I'm going to do this kind of like, maybe this out of the box drone operation. What should I be mindful of? And they'll respond. But they're also the place to like inform the public about what is going on with all of the flights in their region and their area. They're kind of, like just how you'd have a police precinct. They are like the local precinct for the FAA.
Yeah, those are some great sites to visit and great tips, Scott. I know that we're always advocating for the industry, and hopefully this was helpful for folks to get a little more insight into the industry and what's going on and what the expectations are around pilots and equipment and all the things that are in place to keep our airspace safe. And, it is an ever increasingly busy airspace. Yep. And I think some patience is probably good when new technology enters our world and we're all trying to navigate it as we are. But I think I want to emphasize again that the vast majority of people that are out there with drones are using it for good and are being responsible with their drones.
Definitely. Yeah. I'll also add too, you can always ask us, right? You can reach out to us here or ask a fellow drone pilot if you ever have a question. My experience is almost every single drone pilot I've worked with commercially, professionally, or just even flown for fun with is more than happy to answer questions and explain what we do. Yeah.
We want to protect our industry. We want to protect our livelihood. And, the last thing we want is misconceptions and perceptions of the industry that can really give the industry a black eye. All right. We're going to call that a wrap. Until next time. Take care, Scott.
All right. Thanks, Mike.
Bye.